Welcome, everyone. We have this interesting technology here where I actually cannot hear you. I might need to get one of those additional headsets so I can also hear. I'll do that right now. Thank you so much. My name is Clea Kaske-Cook. I lead policy, advocacy, and member mobilization at WBCSD. And we have been working together with many of our members and civil society organizations and others on a host of panels here. Originally, this session today, Trade Facilitation for the Circular Economy, the intention was actually for it to be presented by my colleague Mike Dahmen, who leads all our circular economy work. She is in Stockholm. Unfortunately, she's very sick. She and I have been talking last night. We talked again this morning, and she was unable to come here. She feels extremely sorry about this. So I'm stepping in on her behalf. I will not do as good of a job as she would have, but please excuse any issues potentially. We'll do great. It will be an amazing session. We have an amazing keynote speaker and really impressive panelists. So I'm extremely excited about this session. One thing to note is it is live streamed, both on WBCSD's website and on YouTube. So you can be sure that you will have quite an audience either live or later on. So just wanted to mention that, and we're really excited to the session. The topic of trade facilitation is coming up a lot. Mike prepared a few key statements for us. In particular, welcome everyone. We are here at Stockholm Plus 50 talking about trade facilitation and the circular economy. 5 decades have passed since the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm in 1972 first focused the attention of the international community on the twin problems of environmental degradation and poverty. This was a watershed moment that led to the creation of UNEP and the adoption of the Stockholm Declaration. It is now 30 years since the Earth Summit took place in Rio in 1992. The Earth Summit marked a turning point for the world. For the first time, sustainable development became a common agenda for the international community, and the meeting was the first meaningful global collaboration since the Cold War. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD, the abbreviation, was also born from the summit, emphasizing the core role of business in bringing about a sustainable future. The context for Stockholm Plus 50 could not be clearer. A half-century of intergovernmental activity and scientific evidence has raised awareness on what the environment and development problems are and why they have come about. But it's not so far fully unlocked the how to harness the full power of business and the financial system to recreate a healthy planet for the prosperity of all. Today, we are zooming in on trade facilitation and the circular economy. I have a few key data to share, and later on actually we'll be sharing with you a screenshot of the Stockholm Action Agenda that we launched yesterday that's calling for Global Circularity Protocol. We're really driving the agenda forward. But just to zoom in on this, we are extracting and processing 100 billion tons of natural resources every year, contributing to half of all carbon emissions and 90% of all terrestrial biodiversity loss. The current linear model of production and consumption is also a significant driver of social injustice, with the majority of resource consumption and wealth occurring in the global north, but the highest level of environmental impact and threats to human health being experienced in the global south. The circular economy offers a value chain approach to tackling this problem. We aim to design our economy based upon 3 principles: eliminate what isn't necessary, circulate what we have, and regenerate our environment and human health along the way. No country can achieve a circular economy on its own. Rather, all are dependent on international trade to secure affordable and reliable access to a wide range of different materials, goods and services. Waste is everywhere. Collection and recycling facilities to turn end-of-life materials into a new life are not. Trade facilitation is a key enabler that we need to unlock for a global circular economy. Furthermore, The circular economy has itself only been embedded to a limited degree in bilateral, regional, and plurilateral trade and economic cooperation agreements. This restricts the scope and potential for collaboration around transboundary end-of-life material movements. So in this session today, we are going to dive into this issue and hear from companies and experts in the field what possible routes forward are. And I have to say, we have an amazing list of experts from the private sector and academia, knowledge, and civil society. So I would like to actually start. We have one more slide to share with you, just because, if you can please go to the next slide. Oh, okay. So this is a very brief slide to just share with you. It's the Stockholm Action Agenda that I referenced earlier, which is what we launched yesterday. It is a draft document for discussion at Stockholm Plus 50, a big focus, and one we highlight 8 levers for value chain transformation, amongst which we also highlight the role of skills, the role of circularity for sure, the role of finance, the role of infrastructure, both physical and digital, but we also focus on some key areas of action, one of which is a circular economy protocol. So I just wanted to highlight this because it really links to today's discussion. We are delving into trade facilitation today, much more specific, but it's just a little preamble that I wanted to share. This is me. And here's our keynote speaker. Nicholas, are you able to hear us? We have Nicholas Lockhart, who's a partner at Sidley Austin LLP, joining us. He's specialized in international trade law. Nicholas, thank you. And we are really happy that you're joining us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Clea. Thanks for that introduction. Thanks also for stepping in to replace Micah at the last minute. You did an excellent job. I'm really happy to be joining a celebration of Stockholm 1972 because it was a really significant development for international environmental action. Micah has asked me in my remarks to frame our discussion of how trade facilitation can help promote the circular economy. Let me start by recalling the key principles of a circular economy, which Clea actually also just touched upon. And they're captured in the 3 R's, which are reduce consumption, reuse goods, and then recycle them. And we're looking at how trade policy can help facilitate these aspects of the circular economy. Now, trade policy is, of course, an important tool that can be used to achieve each of the 3 R's. But in today's session, we're going to be focusing on one of the R's, namely, how we can use trade policy to optimize responsible recycling. I'm not sure whether you have my slides in the room, but if you do have my slides in the room, then please move to the next slide. We're going to talk specifically about 2 things. We're going to talk first about how national and international trade rules, which were designed for a linear economy, currently create barriers to trade for recycling in a circular economy. And second, we're going to talk about how we can improve these rules to overcome the barriers and promote trade for responsible recycling. The good news is that with the right stakeholders on board, we can develop a blueprint within 12 months that will lower the barriers, and we can do that in a way that is both practical and impactful for the environment. So with that goal in mind, let me move to the next slide, which is actually already up. It was the slide with the 3 numbers. So the problem stems from a linear system that has created and continues to create just vast quantities of waste. It can be hard for us to conceive of just how much waste we've actually created in the past and how much we're still creating today. But there are 3 facts. Here are 3 facts that I find telling. So every second of the day, we generate 1,700 kilos of e-waste, 12,680 kilos of plastic waste, and almost 3,000 kilos of textile waste. Now that's every second of every day, and that's just 3 categories of waste. So moving to the next slide, The vast majority of this vast quantity of waste faces a very linear end. That is to say, it is landfilled, burned, or simply dumped. Now, for me, this is truly a waste because the resources locked up in the waste are permanently lost. And in the process, we create multiple environmental hazards and pollution. Recycling, on the other hand, can unlock the resources in waste. It offers us a win-win solution. We can reduce environmental hazards and pollution, improve social outcomes, give waste a value in a closed loop, and reduce resource consumption. But despite the benefits of recycling, recycling still counts for just a tiny fraction of current waste management. So another statistic, globally for e-waste, it's just 17% of the total. And for plastic and textiles, it's actually a much lower figure. The bottom line is that to deliver on a circular economy, we need to improve recycling rates dramatically. And responsible recycling must become a much bigger part of the solution. So turning to the next slide. So how does this connect? How do these problems connect with trade? Well, when we think about where recycling can happen, it can't always happen locally in the place where waste is generated within each country. And there are two reasons for this. The first reason is that although we generate waste almost everywhere, there are many places on the planet where we don't have formal recycling facilities. For example, on the entire African continent, we hardly have any formal recycling facilities for e-waste. And we face much the same problem in other parts of the world for e-waste and for other categories of waste too. Second, recycling plants often need to operate at a certain scale in order to be worthwhile. And it's just not effective to have recycling plants for all goods in all countries. The result is that we won't have recycling for every good in every country. Now, that's just like the way we don't produce goods, every good in every country. And what it means is that as part of the solution, we will need cross-border trade for recycling. And that, at least for me, offers us a better choice than landfill, incineration, or dumping. So moving to the next slide, please. This is a sensitive topic, and I recognize that any discussion of the cross-border movement of waste rightly raises concerns. In the past and still today, waste has been moved across borders for all of the wrong reasons. We all know that developing countries exported their waste to developing countries, and to some extent that continues today. And there it was landfilled, incinerated, or dumped. Developing countries literally became the end of the line in a very linear approach to waste management. This is clearly unacceptable. And in 1989, to prevent this type of trade, the international community came together and took the important step of adopting the Basel Convention. The Basel Convention has very strict rules on the cross-border movement of many types of waste. And the list of waste covered by the convention is rightly continuing to grow. Last year, certain categories of plastic waste were added, and there's a proposal to expand coverage to additional types of e-waste. Basel is also implemented with rules at national level. So we have layers of national and international rules here. And sometimes the national rules can be even stricter than the convention itself. Now, a good example of national implementing rules is the EU's Waste Shipment Directive, which is currently under review and which I think we will talk about in the panel discussion. So moving to the next slide, please. Just thinking about the substance of the rules in the Basel Convention, trade in waste is often banned. And when it is possible, it's subject to extremely demanding approval procedures that center on a process that's known as prior informed consent or the PIC procedure. What's more, for a single shipment of waste, the approval hurdles have to be cleared multiple times in the country of export, in each country of transit, and in the country of import. It is notoriously difficult to get Basel approvals. A recent paper by two NGOs, the Prevent Waste Alliance and Stop the E-Waste Problem, examines some of these challenges with the implementation of Basel, and I want to share a few of their insights. So first, approvals often take months and sometimes years for a single consignment. For example, they highlight a recent shipment from Japan to Belgium, which transited through a number of countries, and where securing the approvals took fully 16 months. Second, the rules are so complicated that officials often don't understand them, and they often don't stay in post either long enough to acquire useful experience with them. Third, given these problems, companies face a great deal of uncertainty about whether approvals will ever be granted, and if so, when they will be granted. Fourth, even when approvals are granted, the process is extremely costly and time-consuming. In fact, the process is so difficult, the hurdle so hard to overcome that many companies will not even spend the time and money trying to secure approval. And that obviously has an impact for moving waste for responsible recycling. In 2020, I participated in a survey run by the World Economic Forum where we interviewed companies on their business models for achieving circularity for e-waste and plastic waste. And time and again, the #1 trade challenge that was cited by companies in their efforts to move to a circular business model was the Basel Convention. I also recently talked with a plastic recycler. Now, this is a company that recycles mixes of the toughest to recycle plastics. It can return the plastic to virgin quality. It can do that. That process can work over and over again without a loss of quality. The company's emissions have also been verified in an independent life cycle assessment. So there's a lot to like about this company's recycling process. But the company is holding off building a plant in Southeast Asia because Basel rules make access to sufficient plastic waste both too uncertain and too costly. So moving to the next slide, for me, confronted by facts like that, there's something not quite right here. On the one hand, we are swimming in waste that we should be recycling. On the other hand, current trade rules are frustrating our ability to move that waste for responsible recycling. So for me, in a situation like this, we need to take a really close look at how we can improve upon the rules to optimize circularity and responsible recycling. Now, that shouldn't be difficult to do, certainly not given the shared sense of urgency in both the public and private sectors about tackling this problem. In saying that we should improve the trade rules, I want to be really clear about one thing. We always have to ensure strong regulation of trade and waste for responsible recycling. We do not want trade rules to be misused to allow waste to be dumped in places where it won't be responsibly recycled. So the goal has to be strong regulation that works effectively to facilitate legitimate trade that will enable responsible recycling. And again, as I said at the outset, with the right stakeholders on board, this is achievable. We can get a blueprint together within 12 months that will make a practical and impactful contribution. Now, what would this blueprint look like? In short, what we would do is we would create a special set of customs procedures. We would do that within a provision of the Basel Convention known as Article 11, and we would do it for goods that are capable of being recycled and that are verified as being destined for environmentally sound recycling. Now, here are some of the points that I think should be considered as we develop these rules. First, we should look at requirements for responsible collection, transportation, and recycling of the waste. Second, we should be thinking about a fast track for approved procedures. Third, we should be digitizing, harmonizing, and centralizing the approvals procedures. We should also look carefully at communications between authorities, and we should think about assigning them distinct roles depending upon their place in the transaction. So country of export, transit, and import. We should also look at timeframes for official action and the consequences of inaction. And we should always aim for tech neutrality so that the rules are not quickly bypassed by recycling innovation. We would probably aim to pilot this project among a small group of countries so that we could iron out wrinkles and create trust, and then expand it to bring in other countries. And we would want this pilot to run among countries where there is, on the one side, a commercially meaningful supply of waste, and on the other side, where there is high quality, responsible recycling capacity to take on this waste. And then moving to the next slide, who and what do we need to build this blueprint? So as ever, at least for me, teamwork makes for better results. And in this case, we need the coordinated engagement of a number of different stakeholders. We need national governments, countries of export, transit, and import, ministries of trade, customs, and environment. We also need international organizations like the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm Secretariat, the World Trade Organization, and the World Customs Organization. Business also brings us meaningful practical insights. Companies like producers, waste management companies, and logistics companies. And we need civil society, academia, and NGOs. We also need an institutional home to quarterback this effort and coordinate the different stakeholders. And we're lucky that just this week, several NGOs have come together under the Chatham House umbrella to propose the Global Circular Economy Roadmap. And Jack Barry, who's a panelist on today's session and who's with Chatham House, will speak to this proposal in a few minutes. So Clea, that wraps up my framing remarks. To summarize, the global community now has an opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to promoting the circular economy, and it can do so by improving the trade rules for responsible recycling. I hope very much that the international community, that we collectively can seize this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the discussion of these ideas on the panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nick. This felt like a masterclass, really, on the history, the why it matters, and what needs to get done. Extremely powerful. So thank you so much. I will not even attempt, I took notes, but I won't attempt to summarize it. Rather, I would love to welcome our panelists. So please welcome, and if I mispronounce something, sorry, Jean Cox-Kearns, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer for TES, which is basically the end-to-end partner for the commissioning, deployment, and retirement of technology assets. Welcome, Jean. Then we also have Gina Kelly, who's the Global Lead Circular Trade Policy at Dell Technologies. You can see Gina. I hope she's joining us online. We have Pernilla, and thank you, Pernilla, for being here, Head of Public Affairs at H&M. We also have Stientje van Veldhoven, Vice President and Regional Director for Europe at WRI. And I have to say, I was on the same roundtable on nature yesterday with Stientje, and it was really great just to learn from her. So I'm excited for today's contribution. And then, already mentioned, is Jack Barry, Research Fellow at Chatham House, which is an international affairs think tank and really launching some groundwork in this space. Wonderful. And Gina, we see you joining us online, so welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I love how technology works. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining this panel. We're really grateful. I have a question for you, and I actually was thinking that all of you, maybe except Jack, because I had a separate question prepared for you, could answer this one. What role does the circular economy play within your company or country organization? And to what extent do you use or see the importance of secondary materials? So I would love to hear from you on that. And maybe we first, Pernilla, I would love to hear from you on what you think.
I'm happy to start there. So I represent a company, H&M Group. We've been here for more than 70 years. And we know that we want to continue to be here for more than 70 years. And to do that, we know we need to go circular. There is no other way. And we have created a goal to 2030 to double our revenue and half our carbon emissions. And when we double the revenue, everyone thinks that we need to double our products, which is not true. That's not what we want to do. We want to go full on in circular. And circular, that means circular business models. So it's a lot about resell, it's a lot about renting and recycling, etc. And it's also about recycling the materials and the products. So being a global company with a global value chain, cross-border is crucial. I'll just stop there. I have a lot of other things to say, but leave that to others.
Great, very clear. Gina, what would you think about this?
Yeah, similar to Pernilla, circularity is really a business imperative for Dell, and to achieve that circularity, we've had to incorporate new strategies and approaches to design and manufacturing that eliminate that kind of concept of waste. And key to that is the use of recycled and renewable sources becoming part of the norm of the building blocks of the technology. And then in addition to that, we've had to kind of explore new business models to extend product life cycles and make it easier to recover materials. So to that end, Dell has set very ambitious, lofty 2030 moonshot goals, which are our sustainability goals, where we've prioritized the use of recycled and renewable materials in both products and packaging. And the goal there is that by 2030, 100% of our packaging will be made from recycled and renewable materials. Half of our products will be made from recycled or renewable materials. And then the goals around product take back. For every product customer buys, we will reuse or recycle an equivalent product. So therefore, material sourcing and selection are key aspects for us in our approach to that circularity.
Thank you, especially that moonshot goal. I love that terminology.
Yeah.
That's great. Jean, what would you say about this question, about the role of circular economy within your company?
So I would say that TESS is a circular economy company. We're a technology transformation lifecycle company. So we work in the technology space. We sit between companies that are using technology and manufacturers of technology. We're taking that technology back at the end of its first or second life or third life, depending on where it's coming from. And we're either preparing it for reuse or preparing it for recycling so that you can recover all of the materials. But more than that, we're also investing a lot in research and development. So we've recently opened a number of battery recycling facilities. We also will soon start a facility which is creating carbon nanotubes from plastic. So we're consistently looking for opportunities to reuse materials in new ways and to prolong the life cycle of products and materials in the market.
Thank you very much, especially on the prolonging of the life cycle. Stintje, from a WRI perspective, so not a company perspective, how important is this issue?
Well, it's crucial. I think I've been working in circularity for also in my previous political role for over a decade now. And actually in that course, all of a sudden I remembered that as a child, you can imagine me, 2 blonde ponytails standing on a green lawn. I was looking up at the sky and I was thinking, does anything ever leave this earth? Or do we ever get anything? And of course, apart from little helium and the occasional meteorites, the answer is no. So when you realize that this planet is actually all that we have and all that we will have, and you compare that with the fact that our current rate of production and consumption, we're on a path for 2.7 planets. Then we need to get very creative, either at finding 1.7 planets or are not using 1.7 planets anymore. And I do tend to put my trust in the starting to not use it anymore. And for WRI, this is also very much a question of equity. Because people, planet and nature, which is going to be at the core of our next strategy, it's actually all one. And all of this needs to be done on this one planet. And we cannot just continue to use materials the way we're doing it, with the effect on biodiversity, with the effect on water and on greenhouse gases that were already mentioned in the beginning. So this is absolutely crucial. On behalf of WRI, I'm co-chairing the platform for the acceleration of the circular economy, bringing together both the public and the private sector, because my firm belief is that these two really need to work together. And trade regulation is one of those particular areas where we can only solve this if we do this together.
Thank you. And I loved your point about we need the public and the private sector to come together. It was also mentioned in the keynote, so it's absolutely core. Jack, it would be great to hear from you, because actually we've seen all these conversations, all the input about why it matters. We see all this momentum from all these organizations. Why do you think the time is now? And what does Chatham House think is required to move further?
Well, firstly, thanks for having us. And I hope Mike is feeling better. And hi, everyone in the room. I just wanted to pick up, actually, just before I answer your question on Nick's presentation, which was great. The devil's in the detail with this topic, and he did a great job. But I want to build on that and kind of make it clear that circular economy and trade, the interaction between the two, is much wider than just waste or recycled materials. It's about the trade in second-hand goods. It's about in goods and services that enable countries to undertake their transition to a circular economy. It's about intellectual property. And it's about biomaterials. It's a huge and very complex topic. It's much broader than just recycling materials. So, and we're just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of really trying to understand that. But to go back to your question, why is momentum building on this topic? We've done a lot of research at Chatham House on crunching the numbers behind trade in secondary materials, second-hand goods, waste and scrap. And it's clear the growth in trade in these materials globally has grown massively. So from 2000, there's around $94 billion traded in these materials. Fast forward to today, it's about $320 billion. And then you look at e-waste, which Nicholas mentioned, 54 million tons traded in 2019. That's about 325 cruise ships worth of weight traded. Now this growth in these materials brings many benefits that were discussed today. It distributes resources around the world, secondary resources, to find areas of production which can reintegrate them back into the economic system in scale and economic form. That's really important. It also provides access in emerging countries to second-hand goods of high quality, which are affordable. That's also really excellent. But it also brings many problems in the scale-up in this trade. For example, Nicholas touched on it, illegal waste trade, of course, brings many problems where numerous countries lack the capacity to properly regulate the trade in this waste, exposing its citizens to these hazardous chemicals, but also the environment. That's an obvious one, but there's also less obvious ones. For example, if you scale up the trade in very low quality secondary materials and waste, it can actually flood secondary markets with these materials, undermining fledgling emerging industries. And textiles is an example, flooding East Africa coming from Europe and North America. And quite rightly, East African countries are worried about this, competing with their fledgling industries. So there's really many challenges, and the most counterintuitive one, if I've got time, is that the scale up in relying on secondary materials actually counterintuitively might increase your risk and exposure to supply chain shocks, because firstly it's hard to quantify and predict the quality and quantity of these materials as they come out of the economic system, and secondary, the price is pinned normally to primary commodity goods. So recycled plastic versus virgin plastic, it's hugely volatile. So it actually can increase your risk a lot of times. So if your economy becomes dependent on the import of these materials, it also increases its risk. But to close off, because I'm aware of time, where does it need to go next? What needs to happen? You know, I take my hat off to the likes of BCSD for getting this conversation going in the publication that they've just published. Also the World Economic Forum, PACE, all doing great things, starting to get this conversation going. There's also lots of initiatives going on, very specifically focused on particular value chains or goods and products. E-waste is a particular one, Nick mentioned that. But these need to scale up massively. They need to scale across value chains. They need to really go global if we're going to make a dent in the next decade. And then to close, what we're doing and why we're here is a few months ago, Stockholm Plus 50 Secretariat asked Chatham House to convene international dialogue on this particular challenge. How can we, as a global community, start to solve these problems together in an inclusive way that's fair for everyone, that deals with these disruptive problems that if we're advancing circularity in Europe, it's going to have ripple effects along value chains to those in least developed countries. So how do we do this transition fairly? So we convened around 100 organizations from around the world, governments, civil society, public sector, private sector, over these quite extensive dialogues, and what popped out is that it's clear this is a gap. It's just starting to be talked about. Trade and circular economy is critical. It has positives and it has negatives. How do we address these as a global community? Well, there's potential for starting the concept of a multi-stakeholder global roadmap for an inclusive circular economy, addressing these key areas of inclusivity and trade that are not yet picked up at the multilateral level or international level. And so we published that yesterday. There's flyers on the table there. You can download it, have a look at it. And business plays a really key role in that area. So come and speak to us if you want to be involved.
Thank you, Jack. Very, very comprehensive output, also of the impact that Stockholm Plus 50 in the process here has made.
Yep.
Stintje, what do you think around this idea, about this public-private coalition taking this forward from a WRI perspective? What do you think about this proposal from the roadmap?
Well, of course, I'll have to take a look at the roadmap itself, but from everything that I'm hearing, it's really music to my ears. When I was just starting in Dutch politics, I was also collaborating with a couple of people trying to see if we could get even goods flowing, secondary goods, or pre-loved materials, right? We can also call them pre-loved materials, along at least some countries around the North Sea, and we call it the North Sea roundabout. All with big harbors, etc. So the transaction costs were low because, of course, when you talk about circular economy, it still has to be economy too, right? So the economic model needs to fit, and therefore, let's say the reverse logistics, the cost of reverse logistics are going to determine to a large extent which business cases will also work and will not work. And already there it was quite difficult to get those flows between those countries that do really trust each other. And so I think the only way we were managing and were able to set up those pilots was because there was trust and there was collaboration between public and private partners. And I would really say that in the context of the EU, we really need to find our way to solve this, protecting the environment on the one hand, and I would even say somehow, somewhere, or at least in some aspects of the Basel Convention, it would need to be strengthened. Because we cannot continue to just export or basically dump our waste as developed nations in other countries around the world, assuming that it will be also, I don't know, somehow magically recycled there if we don't take care of it ourselves. We have to face the fact that that may not be true, and then we should just clean up our own mess. So we need to start doing this. I think if we find a solution within the European Union and find a way to test basically how you could get that done, then we could scale that up through the Basel Convention and do this as a precursor for a real international trade. So I would say we need to work together with public and private entities all together, including customs, including the environmental agencies that are needed and that do assessments. And we need to find a way to have like third parties being able to certify this. We need to bring down transaction costs. So we need to pilot an entire approach. And if we can do that within the context of the EU and then try to scale up towards Basel, I think that could be a very useful route. But to for something like that to get done, you really need that collaboration between public and private partners, because none of us can do this alone.
Thank you. An interesting concept, starting with the EU as a bit of a pilot, moving into the Basel Convention. So I would love to hear more on the business side on this issue and also some of the proposals that has been raised. And the business question here, what is the importance and what are some of the issues you're running into with transboundary shipment of end-of-life materials? I know it's a bit of a precursor, but it highlights the business case for some of this. So the issues, the importance. And Gina, you're joining us virtually, so maybe first to you. We would love to hear from you on this.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, so as a global company, we do have a number of closed loop and open loop programs, and more centralization of those facilities is inevitable. So there's a real need for us to be able to move those materials across boundaries. And really, what we're finding is that there's a lack of harmonization really in the implementation of these guidelines and requirements. Also, we're finding that even in the transit countries, there's a lack of harmonization again, and also a tendency often to overrule the classification of the products that are moving from the destination or origin. So I think harmonization is a big thing. And also in our discussions with policymakers, specifically in non-OECD countries, there's a real call out for kind of information sharing where we would set up either site visits to facilities, link them with other policymakers in other parts of the world, and really increase capacity building. And I think that really would be hugely helpful. And then going down the line would be some type of automation of the pre-informed consent procedure, so that there's more transparency within that whole process. But I think for us, it's the lack of harmonization. And often also, some e-waste is classified as hazardous without regard to the kind of lack of hazardous characteristics in some of those materials. So just to kick off, they would be the main issues that we're encountering, encountering huge delays, as Nick had talked about previously as well.
Thank you. Clear call about the lack of harmonization and other issues you're facing on this. So very, very helpful. Jean, what would you think? What would be your perspective on this?
Yeah, well, I would always like to start by saying, we all know the Basel Convention was developed for a reason, and a very, very important reason, which was the management of waste to developing countries, and particularly hazardous waste. But what I think needs to happen now is some way to balance that with the need for allowing developing countries to become part of the circular economy. And I think at the moment, that's the real risk. We had a customer recently who shared with us that it took them 22 months to get a permit to send components containing rare earth metals to a new facility that had started in the Philippines. So this was a real economic development in the Philippines to enable this to be close to the manufacturing markets. And 22 months, and after 22 months, they shipped one container. And that's just not feasible for continuity. But the likelihood is that facility will fail before it even starts. And, this is where there's a real need for this harmonization. I think lack of harmonization, getting regulations to talk to one another, trying to figure out, applying some design thinking, I think, solutions to what is going on in terms of shipping, and then to make it more efficient, because otherwise we will just continue to see the dumping of materials globally, and that's just not sustainable if we're ever going to be or hit net zero.
Thank you. I love the specific example with the Philippines. It's quite memorable. Pernilla, would love to hear from you both about the issues and the importance of this.
Let me just stop by saying that in 2013, we started to collect used kind of pre-loved garments in our stores. And that was really a way for us to show to our customers that what they are having is a resource. And sorting textile. Textile is quite complex. It's a lot of different materials. So you need a good sorting center to be able to sort that out. We don't have that in every country. So already there, we need to start to ship what something is called waste, we call it resources. That needs to be shipped to a sorting center. And that sorting center, to be really good, has to be big, has to get a lot of volumes in. So that's one part of it. And then we have our absolutely best suppliers on recycling in China, in Turkey, in Pakistan. We need to ship that material, still called waste, to these countries. And the suppliers there, they are eager to get it. However, we have barriers there to get it in. So that explains just how there is a need to facilitate it, but there is also a need of harmonization, what you've been talking about, and also about definitions of what's waste, what's reuse, what's repair. We need to have modern definitions on that. And of course, I just need to also to mention in this context that, I mean, we are selling our garments in 74 markets. The whole labeling approach needs to be harmonized as well. That's a big burden for a company. So that was just touching briefly on one. And I just also, on EU, start in EU is not good enough for us, but of course we need to start somewhere. And we have the waste shipment regulations within the EU that we are very active on, and that we also very in favor of. But there is also needs a lot of details, crucial details that need to be done. Yeah.
Thank you, Pernilla. Clear on the labeling side, the harmonization also. And Stintje, I saw you wanted to jump in, so I love the engagement. This is fun.
Two things. What struck me is when you said we want to ship it, it's regarded as waste. For us, it's a resource. I think the problem is that the same material that can be a resource can at the same time also still be waste if it's dumped in East Africa. And so how do we create green lanes between producers and consumers of secondary materials? I think it's this green lane concept that we should try to think about, because it can still indeed be a waste, right? If it's dumped by the side of the road, it's still a real environmental problem. And so we need to find a way that enables the good girls and keeps out the bad girls or the bad guys. Let's not be gender specific here. But so that is, I think, what makes it complex, unless you develop a kind of a green lane concept. Then on the labeling, one of the things that is also complex is that there was a research done, I think it was done in the Netherlands, that quite often the label of a garment doesn't actually correspond to what's actually in the garment. And then it becomes very complex also for your sorting, etc., if the label doesn't reflect adequately what you're actually buying. So on labeling, I think we have even further work to be done. And you're right, I mean, this needs to be global, but we need to start somewhere, right? So if at least we can get it started on a market which has the size of the EU, it's also worth investing for, because if it's too small, then you don't get those trade flows and those volumes going.
Yeah. But then I would just like to add one thing there. On the EU, we have the EPR schemes coming up in the EU, and that is still, if that is on every country making decisions how it should be, it's a big problem.
Yeah. So the harmonization of EPRs, absolutely.
A lot, yes, and I also know Jack also wants to, but please go ahead. Yes, because there's so much being covered here, taking ample notes, but please.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that, TESS is a company that's headquartered in Singapore, and that's where we have a lot of state-of-the-art facilities. But Singapore is not an OECD country. So one of the struggles that we have is that our customers who want to do the right thing around regulation won't allow their material to ship to Singapore for treatment. So this is where this green lane concept would be really, really beneficial, because the creation of a green lane may get away from whether we're OECD or not OECD, or developing or developed, or, and be more specific to facility and need.
Perfect to hear that endorsement. Jack, what do you think? I saw you nodding.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to build on all of your points, really. I think, and it's interesting you mentioned Singapore, I'll bring that up afterwards. Totally agree with harmonization, totally agree with we need to restructure the harmonized system of codes, but that takes every 5 years, and it's just happened, so we're going to wait another 5 years for that to come through. Basel, it could be strengthened through amendments, which is happening, but it's going to take several years. So green lanes is a really good opportunity. It's some way to work around the system in a legitimate way. And there's lots of, you mentioned North Sea Roundabout initiative, which is really an excellent initiative, but there's loads of other examples of ways businesses trying to work around the complexities, but do it legitimately in an inclusive way. And the thing, authorized economic operators is a term which essentially can authorize a legitimate recycler, remanufacturer, refurbisher in a recipient country by the exporting country and gives them a kind of a special license to operate and import those goods because they meet certain standards. That's a fairly common instrument, not just for trade and waste, but Singapore actually really was quite advanced because they weren't just thinking about waste, they recognized the value of importing remanufactured goods and exporting remanufactured goods. So going beyond waste to think about how circular trade can bring a lot of value to them, and they dropped import charges on remanufactured goods and created a special economic zone where they can import these goods, remanufacture them, and sell them to the rest of Asia, and mostly heavy equipment, machinery equipment. And that's that's a really good way. They can control it in a zone, they can regulate it, audit it, but also it can still function. So there's lots of ideas out there. We just need to now really pick out the really best ones and scale it up.
That's a really cool example. Both, we heard of the green lanes, what are governments like Singapore exploring to do, what are companies doing, best practices. Gina, would love to hear from you. As you're listening to this conversation, what are you thinking? Do you have any example? What is your perspective on some of these ideas?
I totally agree with everything that's been said. And I think one thing that I probably should have mentioned was that, there's a tendency for companies, at least in our sector, to really take the low risk approach. So, often we will categorize shipments as waste prematurely because we want to be on the right side of the regulation and compliance. And that really kind of disrupts and shifts our whole kind of circular economy models. So there is a huge impact on that. And I think it kind of goes back again to the lack of harmonization that we've talked about. Those green lanes, great projects, if they can be extended out. But I think also to digitize and automate the whole pick processes as well. There are a number of pilots, I guess, being talked about globally that we would be interested in participating in and kind of developing further, so that there's some kind of transparency again around the materials that are being moved.
Thank you. So what I'm noticing in this panel, there's a surprising amount of alignment. Really, there seems to be quite a lot of agreement, which is good, but why isn't more happening? What are some of these big roadblocks, right? We have 10 minutes, I just got the note on this, and I would love to hear your perspective, and maybe Jack, starting with you, right? We've shared a lot about the issues, we've shared a lot about the challenges, you've made concrete proposals. Where do you see kind of your dream state in the future? Where do you think we need to be going? We have Stockholm plus 50 right now. And let's think about, next year, but also the 2030 agenda. What do you think needs to happen? Where will we be going?
That's a big question for this topic. I think it goes back to the very first thing I said, is the discussions now happening, particularly at WTO level, with the structured sustainability discussions, tests, and the informal working group around circular economy and trade. So it's percolating into the trade system now, but it's taking a lot of time. So that needs to be really accelerated up. And I think if we really, really want action on this, it can't. Business play a really key role, but it can't just be left to businesses to figure out these green lanes and solve these problems. It has to be fully integrated across trade agreements. At the moment, circular economy, if it is mentioned at all in trade agreements, is mentioned in the Sustainable Development chapter very vaguely. Circular economy needs to be embedded across pretty much every chapter, running from like public procurement to financing, and then even to requirements for traded goods and shared and harmonized definitions. And only when we embed it in our trade agreements where we really get consistent and aligned action on this. So building up to 2030, that has to be priority.
Perfect. That's very clear because it's really about how do you see progress happening. Student here, what would be your perspective on this?
Awareness, because we all know how important this is, but I think that if I compare where circular economy is and compare it to climate, then we really run a couple of years behind, and we're going at breathtaking, how do you call that? Very high speed, right? But there is still so much awareness that needs to be gained, and people need to understand that it's about half of greenhouse gases. Nobody knows that it's about 90% of biodiversity, right, the link. So the awareness, if the awareness grows a lot, and that is, I think, what we all can do, also by highlighting and by giving good examples, but also by getting the facts out there and both the solutions and the links to the crisis that people do have in their head and where they are working on, they need to see this as one of the solutions. And once we create more awareness, we will also be more dynamic, right? Because people have so many problems to solve. They need to know that this is actually one of the solutions, and that awareness is still lacking, I think, in insufficient amount.
Thank you.
It is growing, but it's not big enough yet.
Very clear point on the awareness. Gina, what would be your perspective? What do we need from a progress? What needs to happen to have more progress in this space?
Awareness, my God, that's certainly completely support that. I think really better collaboration with policymakers and regulators, really a focus on collaboration and capacity building, harmonization, which we've all talked about, but to build up trust between the private and public sectors, because I guess there probably is that's quite lacking at the moment. So to build up that through information sharing, as I had said, that would be of huge benefit.
Thank you. Pernilla, what would be your perspective on the progress side? Where should we be heading towards?
The regulations are built on a linear model. I think that's the main problem.
Okay. So it's really moving away from that linear structure to a more circular structure.
Yes, in the society, in regulations, yes, everywhere.
Jean, what would be your perspective on this?
I would absolutely support what Gina said, which is collaboration. I think collaboration is absolutely key. I think regulation is happening in kind of these sort of parallel or streams instead of cross-functionally across the various regulatory bodies. For example, I think Basel and the circular economy just have happened without consultation with one another. So for me, I really think collaboration, I think support for pilots, real life pilot programs to really show the benefit. I think there's really no option for failure in this space. I think it's absolutely key that the circular economy is supported and developed. And as a company, we're very willing to support and participate in any projects where we can help to show that. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Especially the point around collaboration, radical collaboration is also something we're seeing more and more and more. We have, I just got a note, 5 more minutes. I was wondering, Nick, you've been listening to this conversation. What would be your final, how have you found this? What has been the key aha moment for you, and any concluding remarks?
Thanks very much, Clea. It's been a really interesting discussion, really enjoyed it. I think for me, what we need to do now is move from aspiration to action. There is, I think, a strong sense of what we want to do, but we now have to move ahead and do it. And I think the other speakers have put their finger on a number of the points that would be important in moving from aspiration to action. Jack, I think, has talked very eloquently about the role that trade policy can play and about the actions that are now taking place at the WTO. And I think that, looking back to Stockholm 1972, I think that's one of the features of the way that environmental law and trade law have developed over the past 50 years. We have been really bad in the international community at connecting the dots between the environment and trade. And I think it would be really important now for us to connect those dots to make sure that we use trade policy to promote the circular economy as quickly as possible. I would also support Jack's remarks about pushing for a just and inclusive circular economy. We want to avoid a circular divide. And so for that reason, I think it's important for us to think about a pilot project, not just within the EU. The EU is actually a party itself to the Basel Convention. So we're not actually making use of the Article 11 possibilities within Basel. I think it's important for us to look for a pilot in between developing and developed countries in places where there are more capacity challenges than you find within the EU, where there's less integration between authorities. So the EU is clearly a leader in this space, and what they're doing is very important, but we need to integrate the rest of the world with the EU and try to make sure that we get waste moved from other parts of the world so that we have responsible recycling. So those would be my concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much also for the synthesis you provided and your perspective. From any of our panelists, in those final moments, would there be any point you really would like to still make? Because you shared key concluding remarks, but I just want to give the option in case there's something. Yes, Jack.
Yeah, my final call to action, building on next point, is we've got the push for climate, the 100 billion fund, which we're struggling to get to, but we need a circular economy, a global circular economy development fund, which can tackle these capacity building problems in emerging markets. And if we don't, even if Europe has really ambitious circular economy policies, the supply chains and suppliers, mostly in emerging markets, are not going to be able to deliver on those demands unless we all work together. And we need a global fund to really do that at a really big scale if we're serious about this. Wow.
This is now going really into a lot of ideas. That's wonderful. We should do a synthesis of everything that was discussed and almost I will talk to Mike about this and almost see what could be published. But again, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I found the discussion incredibly insightful. It links to so much of the work that WBCSD is driving, but also that we're collaborating on with others. Huge thank you to our virtual participants, but also especially to our in-person participants. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the perspective you shared. And rest assured, we will continue to stay involved in this topic and looking forward to bigger collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you.